And here we all are. It's good to see you again. Hi there and welcome. This is a follow-up on our conversation from our last webinar that we had a couple of weeks ago. Radio, is anyone listening? So we received quite a few questions, certainly pre, during and post the webinar, and we really want to address a lot of those here today. Thank you very much for joining us. If you registered, and of course you're live with us now. For reference, and if you didn't catch last time's webinar, in conversation, you can do via our website. It's at fabrik.cloud. We'll reference that a little bit later, but you basically can find it on the Fabrik website, which is really cool, and you can just listen back to us as often as you like. You can also find out more about the best in the best radio app and community ecosystem possibly in the world ever, because that's what we sell. On the screen today again is Vukile Zondi, Managing Director of Gagasi FM for the past 6 years. He runs the biggest private commercial radio station in South Africa. He joins us again. Thank you very much for your time again, Vukile. Also, we have Naveen Singh on screen there, 25 years of radio experience in all fields of radio, from commercial to campus to community, and currently the programming manager at Smile 90.4 FM in Cape Town. Thank you too for joining us, Naveen. And also on the panel, Paulo with the ultimate media branding just over his shoulder, with his fantastic cardigan on that he's got today, creative and commercial content offering. He is a radio creative and writer and works very closely with all radio brands in South Africa. Thank you to Paulo for being here today. And from our side, on the webinar, CEO here at immedia, Anice Hassim. And we also have our data and insight specialist with immedia, Thaila, and then myself, Jonathan Lumley, head of clients, channels and markets here at immedia. So welcome to Your Questions Answered. It's the webinar today. Let's recap. So the last session covered a lot. Radio, is anyone listening? We spoke a lot about who actually is listening, what are they listening to, how are they engaging, and what does the future hold? And as I said, if you want to really catch all of the insight that we gave you there, please go back to our website and take a listen, fabrik.cloud. Just to get back and reset those. So since the start of the COVID crisis, which of course we're still in, radio has competed with just about any household appliance for attention from its audience. Now, maybe we didn't quite cover the proper depth of that question realistically, Vukile. What were those other household appliances that radio was competing with? Was it just TV, gaming platforms, social media, or was radio just winning at an audience over this period?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I think I may have overthought that question initially, because I think part of it is kind of, it's not really about appliances and competition with appliances. It really is for us a competition for attention, one. Secondly, radio is not really limited to an appliance. In fact, the radio in itself, as in the device, is possibly kind of outdated and kind of not kind of up there in our in terms of kind of the places that our audience listens from. There's a number of platforms that the audience listens from and consumes the product, and also any product really, or any device that is now internet driven and online, means that we are now able to be on that device. So it's a laptop, it's a phone, it's a tablet, and look, I mean, there's fridges that connect to the internet now, so we could even kind of interact with that. So I think if it's a appliance versus appliance issue, we don't really sit there and look at appliances, but we do look at now, especially having gone into the digital environment, what is our what makes us a compelling engagement platform in the context of a laptop, where there's Netflix, where there's online, there's YouTube, there's all these other elements. In the past, it was just radio competing as radio versus TV, radio competing versus print. But now in the online space, it definitely kind of, we go into a place where the proliferation of platforms is much higher. And that is then why it's important to, as a radio brand or as a multimedia platform, is to know exactly who your audience is, why they listen to you, and ensure that you're serving that in that environment, and ensuring that you're in the various spaces that they are interacting. So it's Yeah, to answer the question, really, we have been competing with a proliferation of platforms. It's not one platform; it's a number of platforms. Because online, you could be competing with so many other things. It's gone beyond just competing with TV and print, and gone into a space where we're competing with more than that. And that requires us to also then look at ourselves from a content point of view and how we are fitting into the engagement and media consumption ecosystem of the consumer. And that's what landed us on places like social media. That's what landed us in places like being on mobile apps, is that we found that our consumer is in these environments. They expect us to be in these places. And as a result, we then move as a result of that, not really as a result of anything else.
So you're being accessible, but people will find you because of the content.
Yes, certainly. That is what we sell. We sell, and and when I say sell, let me maybe contextualize, but that is our USP. That is our offering and our promise to our consumers, that we will provide content that is engaging, that is entertaining, at a time that you need it and wherever that you need it. And this is where digital has added a very, very different side and a broader side to that, wherever. Because we need to be accessible wherever that person is. And this is where being online is really, really, really a positive for us.
Okay. Naveen, you're making notes. Got a point?
Well, yeah, I was listening to Vukile, and I think, he says it so aptly. And there was a word that was coined a couple of years ago about the attention economy. And I think that's what everybody's fighting for, that in whether you're a brand, whether you're an individual brand, whatever it is. So this, and how do you kind of arrest somebody's attention is kind of critical. And in the format or the platform is agnostic now. It's whether they're interested in what you're going to say and give you their attention. And I think that's what we're all trying to vie for, is to make sure we can arrest our audience's attention by virtue of how much we know about them, by virtue of what we talk about, and I suppose the result of it is the engagement. But up front, we've got to arrest their attention.
It's a very good point. Yeah, the attention economy. Anice, if I can bring you in here, because that's the shift perceptually of listening habits, and I won't go into the different devices. I think Vukile really explained that very well. But increased digital adoption. So Brandon Johnson asked in our last webinar, left a comment, how much do listeners really care about radio now?
I think there's two parts to that question. Is what do listeners understand radio is, on the one hand, and how they're consuming radio, and on the other hand, what do radio think they are? So if you look at it, we know that listeners care a lot about an audio product still, with the rise of podcasting and all of it. Podcasting is basically radio on demand. Is radio competing in that space? No, because they don't think it's radio. I think from a consumer point of view, they're not making those distinctions. Okay, so the distribution mechanisms may change, but I think the consumer proposition, the relationship, the intimacy, the human warmth of the medium, these things are things that are really radio strengths, and we need to be able to have radio double down on that. And something that we've been preaching quite a bit, of course, is in a digital economy, in an attention economy, radio has to transition to seeing themselves as a platform and working like a platform. And that's a change of mindset within the radio station, because we talk about how radio is adapted, particularly clients like Vukile and Naveen and others. They're not engaging the consumer or their audience now in one spectrum. It is the live broadcast, the FM signal. It is the app. It is the social engagement. It is the events. It's that dream world we're looking for, right? It's that fully converged, full spectrum, fully duplex engagement with an audience that has a relationship with you. And that future is not some mythical future that will arrive. That future has been here for a few years now. And I think those radio stations are embracing it. There's change to come in how you program and how you engage. how you market, but it's not difficult.
Okay, fair enough. Naveen, if I can bring you in here, you mentioned last time how Smile has changed and made the on-air content more relevant, particularly over COVID. Maybe that's unfair, but what has radio learned from covering the virus? What would you do again? What wouldn't you do? Natasha Modi asked, what's the plan post-COVID, if we ever get past it? But much has been said about new norms. What is radio's new norm?
I think there's a lot in this. First, I think the thing we learned probably very quickly is radio is a credible, vital companion across all its platforms. People engage with us across digital platforms. People streamed us, and let's be honest, there was a plethora of information across every known platform. I mean, WhatsApp was extremely volatile in the situation, sending out a whole range of things. You can do this, you can do that. And I think where radio really positioned itself, and we were instrumental in doing it here in Cape Town, was to ensure that we made very sure that our information that we checked was correct. And that gave us credibility once again. And radio is known for that. As a brand, you're known for your credibility. I mean, you remember early on, there was the one guy who finally got arrested and received a fine for putting out, don't allow people to put things in their mouth because they're passing on the virus to you. A lot of fake videos went around. And those were the kind of arenas where radio could be that first port of call for credibility. And I think that was radio's win in this whole COVID scenario. Mm-hmm. What would I do again? I think the interaction with our listeners across all platforms, that was for me a no-brainer. Engaging them, allowing push notifications through our app. We had some very fun campaigns like the Lockdown Challenge, where people got to learn about things, learn a new skill. And then as the lockdown extended, we had to adjust a little bit. So how do we reinvigorate? And I think initially we spoke about the fact that, probably initially of lockdown, when everybody had time to themselves, they went, I'm going to listen to all my favorite music. I can do that on my own. And yes, they did. And we accept that. They sat down, they went through their playlist, they listened to all of it, and then they were hutful. They had listened to it enough times. And they were looking again at radio to provide something different. I think we came up with, we call the top 500 songs of all time countdown. And what that provided was an opportunity to hear some of the songs that you love that probably doesn't sit in your playlist. We had everything from the Beatles through to Drake, through to Dance Monkey, and everything in between. So people had another chance to engage with us, and we saw our streaming, like Taylor showed the last time, go through the roof over that period, because suddenly somebody else was curating music that really appealed to me, and through our platforms, learning from listeners, letting them stream on our app, letting them engage with us through our website to tell us what is going on in what they like and what they don't like. We curated a list of 500 songs over 5 days that gave people a chance to engage. What I won't do is buy so little cigarettes and alcohol.
I think if I can just reinforce what Naveen just said, the trust element of radio and the curation, as people, the currency going forward with so much noise in the world is, who do I trust? And that radio already has, and we've said it a few times, but I can't stress it enough. That trust is a promise to keep. You got obligations around that trust. So what I found really interesting was, as Naveen says, you weren't just putting out news, but you're also saying this is fake news, and it's coming from a source that the audience is hungry for trust in, right? Because trust has eroded in our institutions. Trust has eroded in the social platforms. They don't trust Facebook. They don't trust WhatsApp. This is actually radio's moment to insert themselves into that environment and say, hey, you've always trusted us. and you can continue to trust us. And here's how we're doubling down on building that trust. And then the second thing is, of course, people want, at the end of the day, to be entertained. They want curation. They want taste making. They want an opinion that pushes them out of their own comfort zone.
And it's hard to do that, if I can interject, because as Naveen quite rightly says, you put together 3 playlists. So there's my dance one, there's my upbeat one, this is my chill out one. Once you've done that once, you realize how hard it is actually to keep doing this, so it's entertaining to you. And radio's been doing this. That's the job.
Go back to radio's original job, right? Because you learned about music through the presenter who did the show at 10 o'clock on a Friday evening and his taste, right? So the algorithm is not the answer to everything, I think is the point. And so as we went through that sort of uncanny valley, the tech looks like it can replace humans, to now realizing that the tech amplifies human qualities, and how do we seize that moment is really the future opportunity for radio. And we've got to double down on that. And that goes against some corporatized thinking, right? Let's just program the hell out of it. Let's not take feedback from customers. Let's not have the presenter choose his own music. These are radical ideas to bring back to radio, but maybe it's time for opinion and taste alongside trust to engage with our audience.
Vukile, you were going to come in with one particular item there.
No, not really on a particular item. I think just kind of weighing in on this and kind of I must say that first of all, just I think as an industry, radio has really stepped up at this time because of COVID, and a lot of us, because of doing that, and not kind of saying, oh gosh, we're in COVID now, we must just kind of lean up and not and wait and see. But we've already experimented with various and different ways of engaging our audience. And out of it, with us, for example, particularly in the digital spaces, understanding that we've actually got in our digital audience, there's a digital audience that's up beyond our frequency, i.e. KZN. We've got a big consumer base in places like Gauteng. And it's now to really look at how do we now, again, with this knowledge and with this, added kind of pressure to ensure that we engage. And I mean, it comes with its own interesting observations. You move away from your prime time being breakfast and afternoon drive to kind of having late night as your prime time. You've got presenters who you would ordinarily, the old radio station puts all their pressure and all their attention as well on breakfast and afternoon drive presenters and shows. But now it becomes a situation where you're kind of looking at also a huge amount of resources going into online. Not saying that we must now change ourselves to be a station for everybody, but people came here for a particular reason, and we need to now rise to the occasion further. As I said before, it was fine for us to be just engaging with people on radio, but then as people got onto social media, we had to get into that space. As people have caught on to now kind of podcast and rewind, and the feature on Fabrik is rewind, and seeing the amount of attention that we're getting on some of these rewinds, it requires now business to really interrogate themselves a lot better, and also in terms of how we are now going to be interacting or engaging with our clients, because I think Naveen made one of those observations, and I think Paulo even last week, is that with this we are able to now mid-campaign be able to kind of tweak, make campaigns better, see that this is not working, change mechanics and so on and so forth, a lot better and a lot easily, and also to be able to offer a client beyond just kind of the basics, and clients are now open to it. It's not just us. Everybody's now looking at new ideas and better ways of doing things. So there's definitely, we have to do everything very differently, and it really is again now going to servicing both our consumers as well as our clients, with more than just keeping it safe within the confines of traditional radio.
Yeah. Navs?
One of the things that was asked about this was what's radio's new norm? And you'd remember we had one of our bosses in our previous lives, Jono, was spoke about, once the curtain goes up, it never comes down in radio. And we had a slight chance to see the curtain kind of narrow a little bit in the period of COVID, which gave us an opportunity to look at our product, look at what we do, look at how we engage with our listeners on a number of different platforms. And, just following up from Vukile's last point was to start to say, okay, if this doesn't work, normally we're running at 120 miles an hour and trying to figure things out on the fly. And it's just the nature of the business. We've got to be very attentive. We had a chance now we had a little bit more time to be more attentive to our own product. And that taught us quite a number of things. How we message the activations on air that we're doing. How do we bring it online? How do we bring it to a digital platform? How do we push into, the push notifications to me has been a bit of a revelation, because it was the first time that you could interrupt a listener. It sounds bizarre. Because as a radio station, exactly, get into that. I've always been a fan of saying radio is the only thing. Radio is it's such an intimate medium that will be the only thing that you'd allow in when you hung over and naked in bed. But that was because you allowed it in, but it never forced its way in. And now with something like push notifications, we have an opportunity to force our way into someone's attention span, and that was very powerful. And I think that started a new kind of thinking in my mind anyway, of how we can be far more attention grabbing, far more effective, deliver a poignant message at the right time for people who want it. And that, I think, is probably where radio's new norm is heading towards. It's about how because if I post something on Facebook, when you get back on Facebook, you will see it. It's not targeting you and saying, hi, this is what's happened right now, do this. Yeah. And that's been powerful. And that's, I think, radio's new norm going forward.
So what you're really saying is we learned quite a bit over this period then, hey? And still adaptable.
One or two things. Yeah. And I think that's the beauty. I mean, in radio, I think a lot of us, we've been fairly fortunate to come through a number of learning curves in radio, and the curves keep coming, and that's why it's such a vibrant, dynamic medium. And, the naysayers for the 50 years have been saying radio is dead. We just keep coming back stronger.
Yeah, for sure. Thaila, can I bring you in here? Because one of the questions that came through from the last session, and I know we did touch on it, and your slides and your graphs were really on point with regards the listener interaction. But there were a number of questions that came around, particularly from the point that we were saying that some of the stations were messaging about COVID. But were there more consumers streaming for news was one of the questions to come through.
I think just following on to Anice's point and various other people who have actually mentioned it, is trust is a big thing nowadays, especially with false news. And we absolutely saw streaming numbers going up, particularly when the president addressed the nations. And in various times like that, in terms of streaming. With engagement, of course, it went up. And we found the COVID-19 channels the most popular channels amongst the others, sure. Often in the top 1 to 2 of our conversational channels. So absolutely, there was definitely an interest in coming in for news pertaining to COVID-19. I can't vouch for the other news. I wasn't tracking that particularly.
No, of course not. No.
But yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Paulo, if I can bring you in here as well, because there was a lot of talk, and I mean, I won't say controversially, you really did lay down the law and highlight the lay of the land, if you will, around what was happening with the advertising over that period. And we won't go into that too much, but what did come out was a lot of questions around podcasts. So according to Edison Research, that we know 68% of SA listening to radio, 68% of South Africa is listening to radio, but only 10% of that South African audience has listened to a podcast in the last month. Now, that was from Edison Research's own SA Infinite Dial study that came out last year. So how can radio succeed at podcasts? And a little bit further to that is, are South African clients interested in buying ad space in the podcast or in stream podcasts area? Is that something that you're finding more and more of? So it is two parts. How can radio succeed at podcasts, and are our clients interested in buying into that ad space?
So I'm going to be a little bit contrary again, and I don't personally, and I think Alternate Media, we sort of take the stance, we don't 100% believe that radio stations should even be playing in the podcast game, let alone trying to succeed or win in it. And I'll tell you why. I'm going to use an analogy that's going to show my age. There used to be a club when I was 19 or 20 called the White Horse Inn, and it had a commercial floor, right? And that's where they played. That's where they played. Listen, a bad reputation. I was a bad boy. They played all the commercial music, and that's where the cool DJs were, and that's where the cool people were, and they had the cool drink specials, and that was a place to be. But to be all things to all people, they had a reggae floor, and they had a heavy metal floor, and they had a house music floor. But those were crap by comparison, and was a substandard experience. But to get to those, if that was my interest, I had to go through this commercial floor and pay that money to go to something that wasn't as good as it should be. So that's what I feel podcasting within radio stations is. It's by and large a lip service to tick off a digital mandate. I feel that also there's a very blurred line between what the guy said is rewind and catch up and on-demand content that's already played on air, and purist podcasting. And I think we've not quite separated the two, if you want to be really purist. I think there's an issue on monetization, because to sell podcasts, and this sort of goes into the second question, which I'll cover a little bit further on, to sell podcasts is a very difficult sell. Radio station salespeople are very good at selling radio, but they battle with that podcast, and it's not that rewarding. There's not heaps and heaps of Joe Rogan money in podcasting. But
is it numbers? Is it a combination of the fact that you don't have the numbers on podcasts in South Africa?
It is that. And also to a degree where we have tried to put numbers on podcasting through radio stations, and I've done it myself, is that you attach an airtime schedule to it. So a podcast doesn't cost what a podcast costs. It costs what a radio schedule costs. And to be honest, to sort of make that money up on your few hundred podcast listens, I'd rather sell a couple of 30-second spots. It's just an easier sell. So there's a weird monetization issue that comes into it. I think the biggest story is that in South Africa, both as podcasters, as radio stations, as distributors, as everything, we're trying to be what America and the UK are, and we'll never be that way. So we have to create our own South African podcast story. Now, I understand why listeners go to radio stations to look for podcasts, because it's hard to find podcasts in South Africa. There's a misconception that you need an Apple device. When you do go on to Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you don't find South African podcasts. The algorithm disadvantages us. And then, podcast producers in South Africa just don't have the resources. So they do go with the radio stations, and the radio stations, like I say, there's good stuff on there, but it goes, you're going in a bucket, you're going in a place, we're doing it because we want to do it, but we're not putting everything into it because that's not their job. I mean, as you've heard from the guys, there's a lot of challenges and a lot of things that radio should be doing. They shouldn't be doing podcasts because it's a smaller thing and there's no return on it. If we are to say, how does South African radio succeed in podcasts? What I'd love to see is taking those resources you have. You've got studios, you've got producers, you've got people, you've got talent, and putting some of those resources, I mean, if it's only 10%, only put 10% of your resource into podcasting, but step yourself away from it and stop trying to apply what works on radio into the podcasting space. And likewise, stop trying to apply that works in the UK and US into our local context. I will speak to producers on one hand saying, guys, why is it that we're doing English-only podcasts? Why are we not doing Zulu podcasts? Why are we not doing podcasts in the local languages? Why is that happening? And then what I've also seen is that, to answer the second question about advertisers getting into the podcast space, why they do go to the radio stations is because they do understand that. I've come to see that selling podcast space it's weird, it's different. We don't quite have our heads around it. When you look at the numbers, you're trying to equate it to go, well, 10,000 listens compared to a radio station that's got 60, 70, 80, 90, a million listens, the numbers don't just quite add up for me. So I think what we're caught in this weird space in still what we're talking 10, 15 years of podcasting in South Africa, we don't have a South African podcast story. So I think that starts not with the radio stations branding podcasts, but putting their resources into it and building a local South African podcast story in terms of producing podcasts, distributing podcasts, and monetizing podcasts, and stop trying to be like America and actually make what a South African podcast story looks like.
Wow. And suddenly the screen lights up with everybody wanting to comment, eh? Look, before we
Absolutely
do get...
agree.
And I just have to just clarify this, and I actually want to bring in Naveen on this particular point, and that is, what is by definition a podcast? Because Paulo's touched on something quite controversial here, and I've been to agencies as well, also in a previous life, and had to explain, it's a piece of audio, but it's not that simple.
When I saw this question, I'll be honest and tell you, I Googled it, and there's a dictionary definition, and then there's a definition which I quite like. It says a podcast usually include a host or hosts discussing material from news to cooking to interviewing special guests or each other, sharing stories, performing an audio play, or a delightful mishmash of all of the above. But if you go a little bit deeper, and the gray hairs on my head tells you, I remember when Apple launched the iPod. And maybe one of you two might have read that in a bedtime story. So when they launched the iPod, it had this huge ability to then take your iPod, plug it into your computer, download iTunes, which was a little bit different back then, and then transfer stuff from your computer onto your iPod, which you could then go around and listen to whenever you liked. And obviously music was a number one choice. And there's another choice on it was spoken word. And that gave birth to a lot of kind of spoken word content, kind of felt like PVR for radio, and it finally evolved from there to where podcasting is now. So the word podcast comes from iPod and broadcast. So broadcasters made content available for you to listen to whenever you wanted to.
But
that's kind of where it all started.
There is a blur at the moment in that what radio stations do traditionally is to take what you've already heard on breakfast and repackage it. Maybe it's a shorter version. Maybe it's not. Sometimes it's ad played. It is the rewind. It's the catch-up version, if you will. But overseas, we get more curated content. So you've got certain stars that have now are chatting to celebs. Now, these are all podcasts. So,
Jonathan, absolutely. The thing is, radio sees podcasting as rebroadcasting. What they have to see it as is original content. You gotta produce this shit, right? And they've got as Paulo says, all of the infrastructure to do it, because they got producers, they got people. But I think we've spoken about this in a previous webinar. They approach it grudgingly. It's a tick box, as Paulo says. We rebroadcast it, but they never once think we're a platform, right? So how can we tell our local stories? How can we give studio space and a bit of production values to this youngster who's out there, who's got a story to tell and wants to build an audience? And by the way, we'll help him with discovery, right? And I think until radio starts breaking out of this 120-year-old workflow and mindset to understand that digital is so much broader and richer, and they have a head start in many of the challenges, but they can't take the legacy thinking into that, they're going to struggle. So you got to let the youngsters show you the way. But I mean, you can be very powerful.
To Paulo's point earlier, I mean, you can record this on a phone. It doesn't matter if you've got background noise. In fact, in some ways, that's probably some of the best podcast type material where you've got that real live sensibility.
It depends on your strategy, and that's the point. You got to be intentful about it, because the intent determines the investment, determines the execution, and determines your success or failure at resonating with the market you want to reach. Now, at the moment, there's not a lot of that, and yet there's a number of features done differently. One of the ways radio should think about it is extra inventory. So you want to take Indaba Sex Talk and make it a different type of program. Create a different type of programming for it that is just the radio show is just a look into, but the community that's involved and engaged and passionate about that kind of discussion can continue that all the way through. But it does require a mindset shift.
Sorry.
Yeah. So I think I somewhat agree with everyone, including Paulo, strangely enough. But I think my view is that we haven't defined. So that definition of podcast, yes, everybody is trying to at the moment define it based on international norms, and there is no kind of South African, and we are building that. And the approach that we are taking is that we're going to be led by the consumer. The reason why a rewind feature exists, the reason why we actually think that, shucks, we should do this more is because, for example, you'll have an Indaba 6 talk and there'll be a consumer who says, I wish this was on every day. I can't do that on an FM frequency. So I then have now, because of that, the opportunity to go now and create this additional content, which then will come as podcast or whatever we call it. But at the end of the day, the consumer is the one who says to me, I would like to see more of this content. And as a result, we then built onto that. And the reason why we're getting traction is, as you say, we haven't built a South African podcast culture because the content has not been up until now, well, we think, about kind of speaking to what the consumer wants to talk about. There are so many untold stories. There are so many unheard conversations that people are really keen on doing. And also, you've got consumers. I mean, we found, for example, we had a lot of very talented presenters who do a number of things outside of on air, where some of them are actually able to create really great, comedy dramas and talk a whole lot of crap and nonsense that they can't take onto radio. Some of it is freestyles where there will be swearing and all that type of stuff that we want to be putting on. So it's, yes, we are messing around with it with a view to saying, where is that space? Where is that sweet spot that we're going to create? But we have to start playing around with it, I feel, as radio stations, but led by the consumer, as to say that this is what kind of content they want. And if I can't give it to you on the normal linear radio environment without also, as I say, trying to go and say that we're now going to sell, because at this moment trying to sell podcasts, I agree, it's a bit of a slippery slope, and a lot of clients, besides just not really knowing about it, where is the efficacy, where's the motivation to kind of say that, okay, this is something that's worth your spend on it, and also is there enough traction on there, and are we disrupting sometimes the content offering? Because we've messed around, even some people, where they want to be throwing ads in the middle of these things, and it's like, is this what the consumer wants? And I was very hesitant to do that because I haven't. We've often gone ahead from a tech point of view, ahead of the consumer here in South Africa, looking at trends somewhere else. Whereas we should be messing around with this, but be led by the consumer as to what is actually it that they like.
When you say consumer, you mean the audience. You don't mean client-led. You're not client-led by the advertiser, and it's got to be consistent. You've got to be consistently putting these things out. I've heard some great podcasts where it's one or two episodes, and then months later, there's another one that just happens to drop in. So it loses that gravitas. It loses what is a benchmark in radio, basically, is what it is.
Yeah. And if I can just...
Sorry, Paulo?
And if I can just support Vukile there, it's not just to take a shot at the radio stations, because I believe podcasts is also very guilty of it. There is, unfortunately, in South Africa, the majority of podcasters look and sound like me, making podcasts for people who look and sound like me. And if we carry on doing that, it's not going to grow. And I believe podcasters intentionally make podcasting mystical. They make it sound like something that normal people can't get into. I don't believe we have a content problem. I believe there's heaps of content. I believe we have a distribution problem. And I think that's what we need to solve, whether it's things like WhatsApp, sending podcasts over Telegram, sending podcasts on Fabrik. That's where it's got to be. And if South African audience and the consumer wants on-demand stuff as their podcast, let's give it to them. That's cool. And let's maybe not say that an ad in the podcast is your revenue turner. Maybe your ad is a way to market your business. Maybe your podcast is a way to market your event. Maybe your podcast is an event that you can get 100 people to come watch your live recording. But this is the story we have to tell, but it's got to be demystified, and it's got to stop being a hipster thing with guys who buttoned up collars, who they're the only ones that seem to understand any of it.
Agreed. Yeah.
I'm just looking at them now.
Yeah, I know.
I think there's another thing that Vukile kind of hits the button on straight away. Bottom line, content has to have a benefit to its audience. What do I get from it? Everyone. Let's look at the biggest content platform on the planet, YouTube. There's hundreds of millions of videos, but not everyone gets watched. And even those that have high number of subscribers. I saw a video the other day where I thought, oh, that was quite an interesting video. 5 million subscribers. The video that I found interesting had 43,000 views, and he's got 5 million subscribers. And you start to see, people, I think there's a couple of things that you need to understand when you get into the realm of podcasts. Give me a benefit. There must be something in it for me, because that's why I'd watch it or listen to it. I think there has to be some degree of serialization or episodic consistency. So I know what I'm coming to, and I expect it every day at this time. And I'm a big fan of John Oliver, and I wait for Mondays when the new series breaks, albeit now with COVID, it's kind of lacking some of the impetus it once had. But I've always watched him online. I've never watched him because that's the latest episode, and that's the one I'm interested in. And it's kind of those things that you start to, and once it becomes in your nature to want more from it, you start to look forward to it, and then obviously the content creator has to deliver.
For sure. So that's one aspect of it, and came through in one of the questions. And Anice, let me bring you in here, because we've seen it with a lot of editorial that's coming through. So newspapers, online editorial, there's a lot of tech websites. Will they be eating radio's lunch in the podcast space in the near future?
No.
No?
Print is dead. And their business models have been disrupted, and the infrastructure has been disrupted. There's no relevancy there. They've got trust in the big titles. A lot of that's been eroded. If we look at, again, radio strength. So the other thing that, something we've been preaching for many years, the radio has some superpowers, right? The trust, the intimacy, the personality. But of all of the media types, it's real time. It's like digital. It's the analog version. The radio was the first social network. I could get involved, and I'm listening to the same thing everybody else is listening to. The only thing it didn't have was the real-time feedback loop that we could all talk together. Okay, so when we look in a digital environment, real-time is the competitive edge. Are you able to be current, as Naveen says? Are you able to be invited into break into someone's attention? Okay, because that's a trust to keep. Overdo it, and you lose them. But do it relevantly and on point. Then they're going to keep inviting you in because they want that content. They want that notification. They want to know what's going on. So radio's understanding of how to produce and engage and tell stories, produce content and produce entertainment in the real time is actually a very digital sensibility. That's very hard for print and other media types to replicate, right? Because it was the most amazing thing. I come from some print experience, and of course there's the deadline, and we publish in editions. There was the morning, and then the late final, and there's the weekend putting to bed. There's no deadline in a real-time broadcast. It just happens all the time, and it adapts to what's going on, which is why when something like COVID happens, as human beings, we instinctively turn to a medium like radio, because we want to be in the information stream together with everybody else in our community. So how radio exploits that, at least they have that already baked into their DNA. So the other media types is really hard for them to take their sensibility and open that aperture broader, right? I think that's quite easy for radio to do because they've got some of that baked in already. So I don't think that those other media types are a significant threat in the way that they're coming up. Digital itself is a threat because it's taking consumers away from radio.
Is that are the podcasts that are being set into a business tech or a financial online offering, that they now have a place where these editors, editorials, and journalists are discussing it as opposed to writing it in much the same format as we are?
Absolutely, and that's the opportunity, right? So we got to understand how we keep the real time linear format and broadcast happening alongside this very adaptive, very real time, and very splintered. Everything can be its own niche and appealing to its particular audience at the same time, and that's just something that the digital guys are doing independently around the one thing. And what you find is, as a consumer, as an audience member, I consume podcasts, I consume content online, but I like the curation of a general station like a Gagasi or a YFM or an environment where when I don't want to think, at least somebody's reliably going to tell me what's going on and what's happening in the world. And I think there's a element to curation fatigue in the social and digital space. That I've got to be sort of mixing these feeds all the time and staying on top of things. And it's just really nice to change context sometimes and know, hey, when I get that COVID alert and I'm being interrupted because something's happening in my geography, in my community, or in my area of interest, it's a engagement that I'm going to welcome and I'm going to sort of consume and act upon. The challenge for future-proofing radio, if I can put it that way, is to understand that pretty much the audience is dying on us, right? The new generation coming up are not buying radios. The cars have now got CarPlay and Android Auto in them. So the first thing that happens is my phone takes over the entertainment system. And if we not now open with an aperture to that market to carry them along for the rest of their lives, they're just never going to find us. But we've got a moment right now where we've got a chance to take Gagasi's 1.4 million listeners or whatever it is and go digital with them.
Yeah.
As opposed to have them find their own solution.
Well, that probably could be a future episode, I suppose, more stuff on the future-proofing and certainly the podcast as well, Anice. Thank you for that. Vukile, let me bring you in here because we've got more questions that we try and get through before the end of the session. So Simon Parkinson asked, listeners up, revenues down for all radio, that's a fact. Budgets are being trimmed, stations need to catch up on lost revenue, and other media channels are discounting to stay alive, like out of home. So do we go back to the same old? Do we innovate with radio programming and a client offering? Your views on that?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, as you know, we've been talking now. We've kind of realized with radio that it's not just about radio. It's about offering more than that. We've got a consumer who engages with us beyond just the platform of radio. It's got a consumer who engages with us in the digital space. And in that digital space, there's much more to offer than just a 30-second generic and advert and, your discounts, as in, more spots for at a discounted rate. And when I say, I'm assuming that when he's talking about more of the same old, it's unused, it's unsold inventory and all that type of stuff. Definitely not. We don't see that as being the future at all anymore. This is something that we've used and used over again. It's now really about exposing more than just radio. It requires us as radio stations to get less precious about the platform and be more aggressive about super serving our consumer. And whether they, as I said earlier on, if they want us on the ground, if they want us podcasting, if a consumer wants us giving them more and more content, we have to survive. I mean, we have to step up to that. But with that comes now more opportunities for that client to engage with this consumer in the content environment through kind of many channels that online, and let me say channels or tactics rather, that online avails to us. So it's really for us to kind of it's given us a few more arrows in our quiver, and it's now about using them and not just kind of boasting about them and using them. And it requires clients who are brave enough to kind of say that, okay, let's look at this and really engage with this consumer a lot more than just throwing ads, live reads and stings at them. But let's get into their lives. Let's speak to them. Let's understand what they're saying, and let them come back to us and tell us what they do like and don't like, because we have the opportunity to be able to do that, to offer that kind of approach, or that kind of a service to a client, to say that, look, this is the feedback that we've got, and this campaign hasn't worked, but the reasons have been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Don't be defensive about it, but let's then see how we counter that, as opposed to kind of saying, well, it didn't work and it's because your radio campaign didn't work. We've got much more than that now, and richer data on what is working and what's not working, and it's about really working together with clients a lot closely than we've been in the past.
So brave clients come speak to you, or at least speak to Paulo, and then they come speak to you.
Yes, both come to speak to us and to Paulo and them. And as I've said before, it does help. I think it's to have clients and also agencies like Ultimate Media, where it is about kind of, it's not the normal stuff. It's never the normal stuff. It's
different.
Yeah.
Navs, just a quick comment from you before we move on.
Is making is that co-creation is going to be the new norm, and sometimes clients can be a little bit conservative in their thinking. They've got to be a little bit open to some criticism. I know they're marketing. I know they're trying to get the best out of their campaigns. Trust us as radio broadcasters, as radio people. We know what our audiences tell us, or what they like, what they don't like, and we also know how to kind of use words, pictures, very effectively to get across some of the things that marketers don't necessarily think about upfront. That emotive angle is exceptionally important when you're trying to change a behavior, to strike a chord within somebody.
Good point. Paulo, let me bring you in here as well then. So Tony and Malum asked in the previous session, large advertisers have slashed budgets. This is obviously following on from the previous question, as mentioned. So radio needs to find alternative ways of monetizing their audiences, bringing local commerce on board, facilitating business between buyers and sellers in their audience. Is that one way of doing that? Becoming a marketplace, create a new model maybe. So what should be the sales strategy? And I do know that Melissa in your own office was saying, if you pair the right client with the right presenter, you can create magic and return on investment. I think that was the quote that I saw on one of the socials. But what should be the new sales strategy?
I think it's, whatever it ends up being, whatever the sales strategy is about us just shifting what we knew and what worked before, because we don't know. And I've sort of was hoping that there'd be a whole new wave of doing things and not getting all the no's and things that you get. But I just think radio stations, and I mean from the conversations from the gents here today, is that they will be open to different things, is that they will look at different avenues. In radio, we hate that word partnership because it means somebody getting something for nothing. But I think we have to be open to what a partnership means. What do endorsements mean? The right presenters, for them to shift their thinking, because, reality is a lot of them haven't had many endorsement gigs for 2 months. So how has that changed? The relationship and role of the influencer, what does that now mean? So I think it's just all round of everybody just going, okay, things got real. And if it ever has to go back to that, how do we shift around it? And it's just about, shifting rules, breaking rules a little bit, and from a strategic sales strategy level to practicalities. In light of everything, you can spend 2 months as an agency like Ultimate Media, and I'm sure the salespeople within radio stations going, I've been busting my nuts for 2 months trying to get clients back on air, only to hit on Friday afternoon a scheduler says logs are closed, we're not letting your clients ads on. And that's not the way it can be anymore. Yes, there must be structure, and yes, there must be rules, but we're out there working very hard with advertisers that when we get to the radio stations, we're partners, we're friends, and we've got to work together on this.
Good point. Anice, we're going to wrap this up. So I just want to bring in a comment from everybody, if you've got something here. That was from Astrid from Visium, the agency, stating, so there's shifts in partnership patterns. And I think that was something that we've touched on right now. But for how long might this trend continue?
One, I don't think it's a trend. I think it's a fundamental value system. that one has to go forward in. And I think, as Paulo says, we run away from these partnership type things because we don't know what it means to us in general. But what we've got to be able to be open to is to say, we are no longer in a position where one element of the ecosystem can do something on their own. You've got a radio brand that has an intimacy and a trust and a reality with their audience. That means that they don't just trust that when we say this thing about COVID is fake news. They trust that when a personality on the radio station says, I consumed this service, it was really good. Or, hey, here's a commercial opportunity for you. They trust that that's useful to them and they act on that. So how brands and agencies and media sort of schedulers and the station and the creatives all come together is partnership, and it takes courage. So, one of the things that we now have in radio is data. And what we're encouraging our stations to do is show your advertisers the data, show them the campaign as it executes. It's not to say you're failing if you don't get the intended outcome. It's to say, well, how do we change up? Because, hey, before we didn't even know we were failing. It gets 6 months later in some report, something happened. And the only way you actually iterate forward is by having those many eyes on the campaign, on the outcomes, on the iterations and working together. So it's a bit of a journey. And I think in closing, what I think is, maybe it's radio's fault. We've generically created a platform that sounds the same, looks the same, doesn't really reflect the core sort of opportunities of what platform the medium used to be, and therefore brands discount it. I can do the same thing on Gagasi as I can do on Wire, and actually no, it's two different audiences, two different value systems, and you've got to invest some time into understanding what does Gagasi bring to me as a brand, and let me spend some time. Let's test this, let's test that, it's a journey, right? But
So
very
can I
often
just
there's
jump
no time
in?
for that journey. Yeah.
That's an amazing point. And it's something that we, that's the shift that everyone needs to make. And we often see it that, a client, yes, there's a consistent message that must go across, but each station is dramatically different. And we have to, as advertisers, understand that, embrace it, and actually just like chill out a little bit.
Yeah, and go on that journey to say, let's learn about this audience, right? Guess what? Do it consistently. It's not so hard. It's hard to get started. Once you get started, it's fine. It takes 3 months, 6 months. More importantly, it's build a team of collaborators that have learned and failed and grown together in terms of those outputs. So often, I think we just change up too quickly because, well, that failed, so you're out of here. I'm going to go with another strategy agency or whatever the case may be. But to collaborate is a journey, and it's a learning, and it's a courage collectively. I see Vukile wants to add to that.
I was just agreeing pretty much with I think the point around that Paulo was pushing out there. I think we've been saying this for the longest time. You made the example. I mean, it's very easy for somebody. I mean, for the longest time, we've had this thing of people asking us, "Are you the YFM of Durban? Are you the this of Durban?" And it's like, no. Exactly. And then also the thing of that this is a campaign, when there's a campaign that has worked with a particular audience at a particular station, it's a thing of, it should work with us. And you take the exact same mechanics, exact same way of doing something and kind of put it on Gagasi. And then it becomes a thing of like, when we say, no, let's rather do it like this, you got some clients who kind of become petty around it. And it does come down to that. Is each and every single one of us offer a different audience, and audiences come to us for a particular offering and a way of doing things. And it does require that, when you're going to be engaging with our consumer, that you're going to be engaging with them at their level and in a way that engages them. And it needs to be, they need to be respected across all radio stations. And we run businesses that are 24-hour engagement businesses. We know what these people, they tell us all the time what it is that they like and what it is that they want. We have a whole machinery that works around serving them that. So
Yeah.
rather, work with us in terms of kind of serving those people or serving your brand to those people in the right way. We're not saying no because of not wanting to, because really out of saying that we want to keep that consistency and ensure that you're in the process, your brand is kind of put across in the right way. But it's a lot harder work, and it requires a lot more effort, but it definitely is the way that we're going to be able to win and keep on winning with our clients as well.
In closing, yeah, go for it.
I also think what a beautiful synergy is between radio and digital space is the ability to fail forward. And not only in the digital space is that a very crucial lesson that we are learning all the time, is that when we fail, we have to take those learnings and adjust. And I think in the radio space, it's been like that for many generations, and it's not going to change. But the beautiful synergy that it creates when you add them together, it really doesn't depict a trend, it depicts a continuous learning.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we are at, and the learnings that we've taken from COVID are just part of something where we can really fail forward. And not to say we failed, but to take that learning and to go forward with it. And it just goes on to what everybody's been saying. It's really something we can only grow from.
And in closing, Anice?
Yeah, I think, no, so I'm going to say also, I think the industry needs to catch a wake up. Because there's a lot of baked in hardened perceptions. Just to hear Vukile say, are you the YFL of Durban? I mean, it's not deliberate, but I can understand it. It's like, I don't have time to think about this. Just let me put you in a box. Tell me, if you are like this thing, right? So, but the truth is you're not, you're your own thing. And when you think about it, it goes even beyond that. I mean, who is the biggest radio station in Durban? In KZN.
Yeah, in the country.
Station in the country. It's Gagasi, right? But Vukile won't say this, but I will. Their rate card doesn't reflect that because the advertisers don't see them as that, because the intermediaries in the industry don't represent them as that. That's bullshit, right? Why are we allowing this? The value that Gagasi can give you versus 7 other ex-competitors needs to be reflected in the value that they're able to articulate. And it's not because they're not doing a great job. A station like Smile might be a smaller commercial station, but the innovation that they're bringing into their thinking, the courage to be able to say, let us collaborate, let us create. They're open to this. Why are you throwing investment into areas that are going to do nothing for you and teach you nothing and show you nothing next month? So I know that's a bit hard and a bit harsh.
That's a whole
do think. I know, but I think the industry really needs to understand, if I've got money to spend, I'm going to spend some money and learn something versus spend some money and dump it.
Yeah.
Because, I think budgets are tight and we need to rethink how we approach things. So a bit of lobbying there on behalf of my innovative clients.
Awesome. And the big thumbs up from everyone. Listen, obviously we're just over our full hour, but thanks to everyone who contributed. Thank you very much for all the questions. I see there's more that have come through as well. I think we've got some future webinars where we need to discuss radio stations, their relationship specifically with their audience, the nuances of that, the trust element, which I think came up very strongly. There's probably a whole separate webinar, Navs, on just podcasts and certainly so many other things around the advertising and promotions going forward as well, Paulo. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me once again on this webinar and obviously giving and imparting your knowledge. Once again, to everybody who registered and everybody who's been hanging on right to the bitter end, I really appreciate it. And of course, we will send out a link a little bit later, and that will be a rebroadcast for you if you wish to catch up. Thank you very much to all my guests. Thaila, thank you so much. To Paulo Diaz from Ultimate Media, MD from Gagasi FM, thank you very much, Vukile Zondi, and also Naveen Singh from Smile, and our very own Anice Hassim. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll give you updates and details of our next webinar in the very near future. Have a great day. Cheers.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.